All right, English teacher friends. So I had a special request for this writing workshop. It's test prep season, and so a number of teachers asked, in particular, how does the syllogistic method work when a student doesn't have a text in front of them, when the textual support is coming from recall, which is the case for FRQ3 for the Lang and Lit exam. So I said, sure, I'll cobble something together. So we're going to take a look at FRQ3 from the 2019 exam vs Naipaul. And in this writing workshop, I'll do my standard Bob Rossing. So I'll show you how I construct the introductory paragraphs using either the declarative or the inverted thesis. And then we will tackle the body paragraph syllogistically. So I'm going to go through this one relatively quick. Because the audience I made this for is relatively familiar with my templates. And for those of you that this is your first glance at my work, you can just backtrack and sort of scroll through the YouTube channel and get some of those introductory lessons for the templates if you choose. So here is the prompt. In his 2004 novel Magic Seeds, V.S. Naipaul writes, "It is wrong to have an ideal view of the world. That's where the mischief starts. That's where everything starts unraveling. Select a novel, play, or epic poem in which a character holds an ideal view of the world. Then write an essay in which you analyze the character's idealism and its positive or negative consequences. Explain how the author's portrayal of this idealism illuminates the meaning of the work as a whole." So with FRQ3s on the lit exam, with my students, we always just unpack the diction, and it boils down to this: like, what words in this prompt have you gots to get a thesis anchored around? And this one's pretty, cut and dry. So there's no mystery to this one. So there are certain key words, key phrases in this prompt that the thesis needs to get situated around. So this is a relatively easy one. So the question is, how do I write the introductory paragraph? And as always, I'm going to espouse my two templates, the declarative and the inverted thesis. So here they are in a nutshell. With the declarative thesis, you're going to begin with the thesis. So what's the main focal point of that prompt? Like, those words have to be in the thesis. So if a student wants to begin that way, just boom, declaratively, distinctly, concisely drop it in the first sentence as assertively as possible. From there, flesh it out with some context and background. I love to see tier 2 level vocabulary from my students, and by that I mean just your average run-of-the-mill SAT level words. And again, I have a ton of videos in here. There's some that go over my Word Study Academy. My students really, augment their vocabularies pretty well over the course of the academic year. We really focus on that. I have some tricks of the trade for vocab acquisition. Sentence constructs, we're going back to Strunk and White and their staple from Write It Right, and their assertion that there's 12 different ways to construct a single sentence. So you're going to see my students be able to manipulate their syntax to achieve voice, rhythm, and flow. And again, that's something that we work on in our nuance academies throughout the academic year. And then always, my template for the introductory paragraph is exactly 4 sentences long. No more, no less. Always 4 sentences. So thesis, context, background, tier 2 sentence constructs, 4 sentences. So you can also invert it. And by this, you end with the thesis. So sometimes we tell our students to begin with a hook or an analogy. FRQ3s can invite students to do that. It's a little tricky. I tell my students, if you have an iota of poetry in you, then you can give it a try. I find our real math science type kids have trouble pulling that off. So I usually guide them to go declarative. But you can end with the thesis, and again, context, background, tier 2, sentence constructs, exactly 4 sentences. So I'll show you a few that my students did, and then we'll just talk about the mechanics of what goes into it here. So this student chose Catcher in the Rye. As the result of his arrested state of development, Holden Caulfield is one such character whose ideal view of the world leads him astray into the territories of mischief. And there it is, like that idea. You have to be anchored in that word of mischief, right? It's pivotal in the prompt. So make it the thesis. Not wanting to fall over the proverbial cliff into the phoniness of adulthood, Salinger's protagonist idealizes a world whereby he can be the catcher in the rye in order to keep kids forever innocent and pure. In this Bill Dung's roman, Holden painfully comes to the epiphany that such an idealized state of being is an impossibility. Through his mischief and the resulting consequences, Holden invariably arrives to a point in his life where taking the plunge over the cliff seems like a far less daunting task that ultimately really doesn't threaten his existence. So again, in terms of getting the thesis, it's really key that students focus on that idea of mischief and stay truly anchored in the prompt. So it doesn't matter. So thesis first or thesis last. Note the sentence constructs here. Right, this kid can go above and beyond the short, simple declarative sentence. Short, simple declarative sentence. Students tend to just stack that one sentence construct on top of sentence after sentence after sentence, and a redundant parallelism. The vocab is nice, and the thesis is definitely manifest in this. So that's how the declarative or the inverted would work. For one example, another example. So this student did the awakening. So they're going to take the exact same approach to articulate the thesis. Wanting to rewrite the language of patriarchy, Edna Pontillier is one such character that holds fast to the vision of an idealized world that ultimately sees her getting into a great deal of mischief. So that's the kicker right here. Get anchored immediately. So it's amazing, and I'm sure as teachers we experience this frustration that sometimes, we'll be grading essays and students don't even have a thesis. They're ignoring the demands of the assignment. So it's the idea that you have to have that word idealized and that word mischief, both in contention with each other within the articulation of the thesis. So then it's just flesh it out. Coming to a place whereby she acknowledges that if she wants to unshackle herself from the confines of an androcentric society, she must unburden herself from the tenets of religion in order to be the first woman to create a feminist discourse for women who seek liberation. Being the innovator of this new language and gynocentric culture, Chopin's protagonist causes a great deal of mischief as she attempts to flee what she deems to be so utterly oppressive. With the sea as the extended metaphor, Edna becomes a Christ-like figure who martyrs herself in order to give rise to feminine empowerment. So every single time that my students, do an FRQ3, actually anything. So it's, the declarative and inverted can be used across the expository modes. So rhetorical analysis, literary analysis, any genre, synthesis, persuasion, research, argument, this works. So it's the only caveat is where are you going to put the thesis, right? And the rest is just kind of stable. So that's the awakening. So here's another one, and this is a student who really struggles for me. and has not the best work ethic. So that's something that factors into his writing. But look how he approaches getting anchored in the thesis. For many people in this country, the American dream is actually a nightmare. This is especially true of Willie Loman in Death of a Salesman. Ever pursuing the promises of an idealized world, his mischief is what ultimately leads to his greater demise. No matter his efforts to make for himself and his family a dream so full of promise and possibility, his idealized dreams are what gets him into every trouble he encounters throughout the play. So it's always 4 sentences. Focus on those sentence constructs. Get the tier 2 up there without sounding pretentious or contrived or like a goon, and it doesn't matter. So thesis first, thesis last. It does not matter in the end. So we're just getting the thesis point. So, that's a student who ordinarily struggles. And I was a little concerned with the beginning of this, with the focus about the American dream. It seems outside of the prompt, but was able to tie it in and get the thesis articulated. So that's how my students do it. So either declare or invert. In terms of the body paragraphs, so I tell my guys to always create syllogistic body paragraphs. And in a nutshell, and I'm going to assume that most of you guys are familiar with my work. I'm going to go through this one quickly. I have a ton of content in the YouTube channel that goes over the ins and outs of the syllogistic method if you want kind of a longer explanation of it. So it's rooted in the Aristotelian tradition. Aristotle ran a school called the Lyceum, and the rich aristocratic boys would go there to learn about polemics, oration, debate. And they would throw out these big topics. And you might be familiar with a work like Plato's Republic, right, where the question, what is justice, is thrown out there. And all these philosophical think tankers grapple with that question and come up with definitions for what is justice. And Aristotle, just like us English teachers, was principally concerned with how his students established their line of reasoning. And he made a heuristic. We use the word template, called the Syllogistic Method for them to couch their thinking, to house their thinking. And all it is when you argue from premise to conclusion. You got to be very mathematic, very computative in your logical sequencing. So if we were to say something like this, premise 1, all men are mortal. Premise 2, Socrates is a man. Conclusion, Socrates is immortal. You have cogent reasoning, right? So it's very logical. It's very mathematic. So if I were to say arsenic is deadly, my dog ate arsenic, my dog is going to die, right? It makes sense, right? And oftentimes when our students write, they're all over the place. They don't stack their premises together in a way that is synthesized reason. There's holes, there's logical fallacies, there's gaps, there's things missing. So ultimately, what we want to do is to get students to argue like this in FRQ3. So the first premise is going to be a statement maintaining a literary focus. We have to keep in mind that the demand of the assignment is we're performing, in a sense, a literary argument here. So we want to see the terms and the devices in the first premise, right? Otherwise, it's just going to be plot summative. And that's the biggest Achilles heel for FRQ3 on the lit exam, is that most students, by and large, write Cliff Note summaries of a text and have a couple of linking sentences back to the prompt, and it's not quite meeting the demand of the assignment. Something's lacking, something's missing. So this template hopefully can help students with that. The second premise is tricky, and in the sense that the textual support comes from recall, right? So the students don't have an excerpt or the book or the passage in front of them. It's all coming from their noodles, all coming from their head. And then the conclusion of the syllogistic body paragraph is the textual analysis and the links. I always tell my students that the first premise is a promise. At the end of the body paragraph, you kind of got to go back and shake hands with that guy. Make sure that you honored your promise and that you fully sustained your line of reasoning. So let's take a look at what this looks like on paper. So we're going to use Catcher in the Rye, and as always, the first premise is always going to be 3 sentences long. So on the synthesis essay in the Lang exam, the College Board always says your argument must be central. And I say that to my students for every FRQ. So your argument must be central. We got to keep in mind it's expository writing. It's an act of arguing. So we got to make sure we're arguing and not summarizing. That's kind of the biggest snafu with students writing. They get too plot heavy. So let's see how we wield this here. For Holden, an ideal world would lack the corruption and perversity of the adult world. So here's the kicker for this, right? In the first premise, the students need to do 2 things: stay anchored in the prompt, but also make literary arguments. So look at how this student is going to make an argument using terms and devices, but also say super anchored in the prompt. So we'll go back to the top here. For Holden, an ideal world would lack the corruption and perversity of the adult world. So we're in the prompt. Wanting to forever preserve the innocence and spotless existence of childhood, Salinger operates an extended metaphor to convey Holden's perfect state of existence. So we're going to be talking about a metaphor. So now that's cool because we're doing we're writing a literary paper. This idealism, so use the language of the prompt, is also supported through much of the imagery in the novel. All right, so we got our argument established. We're 3 sentences in. Starting with the 4th sentence, we get into the second premise. And the student needs to detail the textual support specifically while sustaining the line of reasoning. So look where this kid goes. Right from the onset, we are introduced to Holden's obsession with the ducks in Central Park. In a taxi cab en route to lose his virginity, Salinger's protagonist asks Horowitz a question. Where do the ducks go when the pond freezes over? So again, it's important to be specific, but this is the area of the essay where kids can get derailed. When you open up the gates, at least I notice when I open up the gates for kids to put forth a little bit of plot, man, they just it's plot vomit. They just want to just retell the whole story. So it's got to stay focused. In operating the extended metaphor of the cliff in Ryefield, we metaphorically are informed that Holden's idealized world would forever arrest the development of children to forever preserve their innocence. The ducks are an ironic symbol to let the reader know that this is an impossibility. Time marches on, no matter the extent to which we want to halt its course. And then I'm out of space here. It goes on to the next slide. The ducks, like every other living thing, migrate and march along the time of existence. They move forward toward the inevitability of taking the plunge over the cliff. The phonies that Holden seeks to never become are merely the adults in his life that are adults because time rendered them so. We further see this idea in the Museum of Natural History. This place holds a certain fondness for Holden because the objects within it are frozen in time. The mummy and taxidermy are forever locked in. But it is not until the end of the novel that Holden comes to realize that this idealized state, right, so in the prompt of existence is an impossibility. We further see this when he tries to erase all the FUs on the museum walls. He can't. There are too many of them. So let's go back for a second because I really harp on my students about line of reasoning. First premise is a promise. The textual support that was brought in, is it linked to the promise of the first premise? Right? Because we got to talk about this idealized world. We got to talk about mischief, and we promise to talk about some metaphors. Right? We did that. We got the museum, we got the ducks, we got the rye field. We're good. Now, in the end, are your links, all right? We have this prompt that we have to contend with. We have this thesis statement that we need to prove. So it all ties back to that language. So look at how the student links it back here. All of the mischief he gets into along the way gets him to arrive at the culminating scene of the novel. While his sister Phoebe rides the merry-go-round, a symbol of childhood innocence, Holden decides to sit on the bench to simply observe and enjoy the scene as an adult. His notion of an idealized world undergoes a radical revision, but it sure did take some growing up pains in order for him to realize and accept the impossibility of his utopic vision. So you can see here, in the end, I always tell my students, if I'm not hearing the prompt, right, in the conclusion of your syllogistic body paragraph, then you're kind of writing an absence of a thesis. You really gotta link it all back to the key diction in the prompt and the thesis in the conclusion of the syllogistic body paragraph, and this student did that quite well. So one of the things that I forgot to mention is this. I've done so many of these, I lose track sometimes of what I say. Syllogistic body paragraphs for my students, they're shooting for 10 sentences. Those little itty bitty 4, 5, 6 sentence body paragraphs that they typically do just don't offer enough support and analysis to fully advance and flesh out an argument. So I tell them shoot for 10, hard cap at 12. Right? Otherwise, they're just going to prattle and blow V8 on. So this is how I advise my students to tackle FRQ3 for the lit exam. And, for you guys that do language as well, it's the exact same template. So nothing ever changes. So if you like what you see with my writing workshops, keep in mind that I do webinars on a monthly basis with Perfection Learning. So I'm usually slated the last Tuesday of every month. I have something going on with them. And so I'll be talking about my templates and alternative grading methods and my Plato's Plato discussion. I also do some work with the National Writing Project. And I think that most of you know Tim Freitas and I are collaborating on a textbook together. And Tim and Brandon Abden and I are presenting at the National Council Teachers of English. So I got many irons in the fire. One thing that I am offering is my Teach It Right 5-week mastermind. So if you would like to learn some of my tricks and madness, would love to have you. So we basically work for 5 straight weeks. We meet Thursday night at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And just kind of equip teachers with my templates and all my other little devices and things, and try to revamp, retool how we approach composition. So if you want any information, you can reach out to me at teachingwritingcoach@gmail.com. I also have a webpage, teachinghowtowrite.com. There's plenty of information on there about the mastermind and some of the irons that I have in the fire as well. So have at it. So take care for now. Hopefully you found this to be useful, and it helps your kids prepare for the exam. Take care.